Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And today we're going to be giving a hot take review on the game we just finished playing, Maracaibo. But before we do, as always, we like to jump into a poll. And the poll question that I asked today on our Blue Sky account, when introduced to a board game that contains cards, at what point do you look through the deck to understand the card distribution? This question was given to us by a listener. He had sent it for the mailbag, but I thought it made a perfectly good poll. A situation happened to come up this week where this was really relevant. So John Walmsley was the listener that sent this over, and he mentioned specifically that he got introduced to Pan Am this week, which is a favorite of our group. But he was going through the game, there's those event cards, and he was like, I got to a certain round and this big event happened that really changed what I should have been doing the whole time. And he's like, if I had been able to look through the event deck in advance and had known that, it might have changed how I played the game or what I kind of played towards. And then he referenced our old Red Rising episode, where at some point in that episode, I made the comment that there's more gold cards than any other color. And you guys were both like, whoa, if we'd known that, we would have done something different. So here are the options that I gave on this poll. And again, we're asking the question, when you're introduced to a new board game with cards, what point do you look through the deck? The first option was before first play, and 7% answered that on the poll. After a few plays, 42% answered that. After many plays, 9% answered, and never, 42% answered. So how did you guys answer this?
I forgot to answer this one, but what I would say is as soon as I feel like it's significant or important, that's what I'm going to look through. If it affects the gameplay, that's when I want to know what the distribution is. If it's going to affect my decisions during the game, or if it should affect my decisions during the game, then that's the point where like, aha, I need to check the distribution of this, or check the rule book and see if it has it laid out, how many cards of this color or this color, this color, because it becomes important, becomes a significant thing that's going to help you make decisions in the game. So as soon as I realize that I need to know the distribution, that's when I'm going to take a look and figure out what's going on so I can have informed decisions as I play the game. What about you, Chris?
I'm lazy. I will look at the card distribution when my wife says, "What's the card distribution?" And I'm not playing board games with you anymore if you don't tell me. That's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but not a whole lot. I don't really dig into that too much unless it's a game that I've played a number of times and it really seems like it's going to be significant to me. So probably whatever that third answer was, like after multiple plays or something like that.
Many plays.
But yeah, I don't do that much.
Yeah. I'm the same. I most of the time won't. I would rather just enjoy the experience of discovering the game and exploring it and trying strategies out. But there are some games where it matters, not only like what could be in the deck, that could have an impact, but also there are some games where like you're almost playing the odds based on if a deck is weighted, like there's only 2 red cards, but there's 6 brown cards and there's 15 green cards, and your whole turn depends on drawing a red card. It's pretty important to know that. So, I think games should really clearly spell that out. I played a game this weekend that kind of had a little player aid that showed the distribution of the icons that might come up in there because it was relevant. So that was cool. Anytime it's really important, they should show that. I also played a game for the first time. I played Godfather Corleone's Empire, which was great. It's Eric Lang design. Really, really fun, fantastic game by him. But the mechanism of the game where you're basically trying to complete these jobs. And when you complete a job, you get some money and then you do an effect. And what nobody told me at the beginning of the game, so part of the game mechanism is once you get money, you have to stick it in a briefcase, and that's kind of like your end game points. But what nobody told me at any point in the game is that there are a couple of those jobs that someone could get that lets them steal money from your briefcase, which I understood to be kind of secure and like it was all good. And so I put all my big bills in there. And then when it came time for someone to get into my briefcase, they were able to steal like a ton of money from me, basically took the whole game from me. And there were some really easy decisions I could have made earlier if I just known that one card existed, that I would have kind of protected myself. So
Tim, haven't you watched any gangster movie ever? There's always some briefcase that's always getting stolen and swapped around. Come on, you got to realize that's going to happen.
Good point. Anyway, I wasn't too salty about it or anything, but kind of important information, I think, for the person that taught the game should have shared that. But it was a fairly new game to everybody in the group. So I think even the person teaching it might have not thought about it or would have forgotten or whatever. All that to be said is like, I usually wouldn't look through a deck of cards for any reason unless, something like that could be in there. If I know there's cards that could really change the way you're going to play the game. Pan Am, I still like the discovery of that. I think it's fun when one of those effects turns over and you're like, oh, the whole table's like, oh my God, I wish I'd known that before. But I can also see that if you're really playing, like if you really care about winning, then it's kind of helpful to know that. So,
well, you want a perfect case in point, Clockwork Wars. I think one of the big complaints that I had was that there were these big, powerful cards. I forget what they were called, but Adam played one on me at the end of the game, and it basically took away my entire strategy of the game. And if I had known that ahead of time, I could have planned around it. So it can clearly be very significant sometimes.
And do you guys remember when we played Brian Baru, I think in Portland, after the first round of the game, we were kind of like, oh, that was that. Oh, he took that trick from me. I wonder what the card. And then we looked at how the cards were laid out, like which colors were in which number set or something like that, or where the wilds were. And all of a sudden we're like, oh, you could totally play around and kind of know what could beat you, what the trump suit was that could beat you. So that was another example where once you realize that, it was a pretty useful piece of information on how you would play a turn if you're playing strategically. So
good point.
Well, here's how a couple of our listeners answered. Mark Edworthy said, I'll look at a few potentially, but don't want to spoil any great surprises. Like that feeling when you first see some massive monster card in Terraforming Mars or even Arc Nova. Don't want to ruin that too early. Yeah, totally agree. I love the surprise, the discovery of just running into some great cards, some exciting effects or something like that. Susan Michelle said, I don't try to understand the distribution so much as I want to understand what I can expect from the cards, their costs, their end of game points, their special effects, that sort of thing. Brian Chandler said, pretty sure I've never done this. I prefer organic discovery during gameplay, including multiple plays. My purpose of learning distribution would be to solve the game, and at that point, the fun goes away for me. Leanne said, never. Is this why I lose? And Noob said, it is actually one of the first things I will ask during the first play. How many of card X are there? What's the highest, lowest, rarest, most common card, etc.? Like if I learn a card game, I might as well learn it with all the information there is. And that's kind of the rub, right? I think some cards you really can't play strategically without knowing some of that information. And maybe it's how important is it to you to learn or to win, or is it fun just to do the discovery? I lean on it's fun just to discover the game and explore it and like play by gut a little bit and sometimes do okay with that. Like I've definitely played with people though that if they don't have that information, they feel like they were robbed from a win and it was unfair. But I can understand that. We play games to win, I guess. It just depends on how much it matters.
So what I called laziness, Brian calls organic discovery, which I think I like a lot better.
All right. Well, before we jump into Maracaibo, there's just one thing I want to mention at the start of the show. I'm not going to do a hard sell here, but we finally have a Patreon. So we've been making this show for 3.5 years, and we'd love some support in helping cover the costs of the show and keep it running. So you can check that out at patreon.com/boardgamehottakes. And we'll mention it in future episodes as well. But if you got it in you, give us a little support, drop over there, and we'll keep this show going. But for now, let's jump into a gameplay description of Maracaibo.
In Maracaibo, 1 to 4 players will compete to be the top sea dog in the 17th century Caribbean, working to amass fame, fortune, and influence with the 3 dominant colonial powers in the region. Over the course of 4 rounds or decades, players will circumnavigate a map of the Caribbean Sea laid out as a rondel on the main game board. Along the way, they'll stop at cities and villages that will offer a number of action options. Smaller villages will allow some basic actions like purchasing a project card or turning in cards for gold doubloons. Larger cities may allow players to complete quests or to turn in cards at the market to take special city-specific actions, like engaging in combat or adventuring along an exploration track laid out along the bottom of the main board. Cities also allow players to upgrade their abilities. These upgrades take place on players' individual player boards, which represent their ship and their crew. Now, helping make all this happen is a deck of multi-purpose cards called projects. Project cards can be turned in for cash, and they also contain goods on them that can be delivered to the market in larger cities to take those cities' specific actions. Or they can be purchased to provide immediate or ongoing effects, depending on the card. Needless to say, these cards and the player's hand management are key to success. One other thing I'll mention is the influence tracks. France, Spain, and England are all vying for control of the region, and the more influence a player has with these 3 powers, the more endgame points they'll score, especially if they're the most influential with the dominant power at the end of the game. Players can gain this influence through various actions presented throughout the game, but primarily through combat. After the players complete the 4th round of play, represented by going full circle through the rondel, the game ends and scores are tallied, and the player with the highest score will be the winner. Maracaibo was designed by Alexander Pfister and is published by Games Up.
Thanks for the description, Chris. And just a little background here. We played on Board Game Arena tonight, and we played a four-player game. This was probably my 6th or 7th play, but I'd only played it solo in the past with a physical version. So this was my first time playing a multiplayer game. And Chris, I think, had played a couple of games on Board Game Arena. Adam's first play, I think. So what do you guys think of the gameplay and mechanisms of Maracaibo?
Well, first thing that stands out is this giant sort of rondelle. You're doing this giant whirlpool around the Caribbean. So you're starting in Havana and you're going east along the some of the Caribbean islands, Hispaniola and Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and then down south across. Now you're moving west from like Caracas around Venezuela and Colombia and up Central America and back around doing a little loop. So there's this big rondelle and you can stop anywhere along the way. And when you do that, that determines what your actions are going to do. So you can either stop in one of these port towns or you can stop in a smaller little village. And in general, these port towns give you this sort of action. Are you going to deliver some goods from your hand? So right off the bat, there's a decision. Are you going to go to this port town, get some stuff, get some little benefits there and do the little delivery thing? Or are you going to go to a little village and do some of the other actions, play a card from your hand, get some little money? So that little decision right there, the spatial component of this, moving around the map and executing the benefits from, that's kind of the core of this game. And this rondelle, this giant rondelle, which is typical of Pfister, that's what stands out to me the most. And I don't know how I feel about these big old rondelles. In general, they don't necessarily do it for me. Here, I thought it was okay. I don't know. What do you guys think of this? The rondelle and cruising around the Caribbean.
I'm pretty neutral on rondelles as a mechanism. I am very pro rondelle as a word. I like saying it. Rondelle, rondelle, rondelle. It sounds like a donut, and I want to eat it. No, I actually think this is an interesting use of the rondelle because you're able to move a lot of spaces. So you can move 7 spaces in a turn if you want to. Which means if you wanted to, you could move around the entire rondelle probably in 2 or 3, probably 3 turns, probably 3, maybe 4 if you wanted to be crazy and take a couple extra actions. But I mean, remember, this is a game where the number of times you go around the rondelle is the length of the game. And so in this one, you have the option of moving really quickly, and that can be beneficial or that can be problematic depending on, what you're trying to do. And then along the way, like Adam, like you said, there's all the different action options that you have. And one of the interesting things, and I won't go too deep into this because I, give Tim a chance to talk about the rondelle piece of this, but oh man, do you have to choose your actions wisely because you've really got a couple options there. You can do your combats, you can do your exploration, which are kind of the big sexy ones that you do at the cities, or you can go to these little individual towns and you can do the less sexy actions like buying a card. Well, if you don't buy the cards at the beginning and you don't build up that income, as I learned, you're going to end up at the end of the game with a whole lot of not income. So some cool options along the way. And the rondelle, I thought it was a perfectly fine use of the rondelle.
Well, based on how long that game took us to play, I think we all took too many actions around the rondelle.
Something.
And yeah. So, I don't know. It's kind of like Great Western Trail where I kind of enjoyed it. And sometimes there's fun choices, but I don't think that I like what you're giving up. Like the choice of going to a city where you get that sexy action and you get to trade in some goods seems like the right move, but then you're not building up I don't know, everything you do, it feels like you're giving up other options. And I don't know that I'm just not just kind of like taking a random guess at what's the right thing to do. So I'm not sure that I like it. I don't know that I like it in Great Western Trail either. But what I think I liked about Great Western Trail, and the reason I'm calling that out, if you don't know, is that's another Alexander Pfister game that uses a similar mechanism. I like the hand management with Great Western Trail and that kind of little deck building mechanism. And it feels like that rondelle kind of feeds into, well, I need to go to that space because I got to dump 2, gray cards out of my hand so that I can pick up some other cards and hopefully get a variety. This one also motivated you sometimes to go to specific spaces, but man, it always felt like everything I was doing, I was giving up on something else I wanted to be doing. And I get that can be a fun decision, but for me in this game, it's almost like an unfun decision because I'm giving up fun to do fun things somehow. I don't know why I feel that way, but not a huge hit as far as that piece of it for me.
Agreed.
That said, there's some there's some fun things you do on the rendo.
Agreed, Tim. That I always felt like I was having to sacrifice something, give up something. The one interesting thing to me about this sort of race around the track was it was a race. You had to keep an eye. One of the few parts of player interaction in this game, you had to keep an eye on other people's sailboats. How fast are they going to whip around this little sailing course and get back to the beginning? Because once they do get to the end of this sort of sail track, that's going to give you only 1 or 2 more turns for that round. So you got to plan ahead and make sure you get everything done that you want to get done. That goes back to what you're saying, Tim. Are you going to have enough time to get all your stuff done and do the things you want to do? I certainly did not have any kind of plan or get the things done that I wanted to do in this case.
If I can try to interpret what I think you guys are saying a little bit here, it's that you feel like you have to do things that are important at the expense of doing something that's fun.
Yeah.
At least I think I felt a little bit like that too. And that kind of gets back to that, choice. Do I want to buy a card? Not a lot of fun in that. You're just spending some money to get a card, which is okay. But what you really want to do is you want to go to explore. You want to move on the exploration track. You want to go into combat, which let me use that as a left turn here to go off into the discussion of combat just a little bit, because I thought that was one of the most fun parts of the game. And it's a little bit confusing. And honestly, I've played this game. I think this is maybe my 4th game of it. And this is the first one where I actually read the rules beforehand and understood what the heck I was doing. In the other games, I was just sort of, clicking and praying. And I still thought it was fun enough that I wanted to play it tonight. But this time I actually got a chance to read the rules and watch a video. And so I actually understood the combat a little bit better. But it's not combat in the traditional sense, like I'm going to face off against another player and we're going to roll dice or we're going to compare combat strength or anything like that. Combat is a resource. You build up combat by doing various things around the board. And then when you get to a combat space, you can trade that in. So 2 combat power might buy you an influence with a particular country, or 5 combat power may let you take an influence token off of one of the cities and move in an influence token from the power that you're fighting for, which might be more beneficial to you in endgame scoring. So there's all these little things that you can do that to sort of tweak the influence track in combat. I thought those were a lot of fun. Those felt really enjoyable to me. But every time I did that, I also knew I was doing it at the expense of doing something that was probably just as important, like building up my point income or my doubloon income.
So way back in episode 80, we did an episode on best and worst combat mechanisms in board games. And I'm surprised that Maracaibo didn't end up on here on worst mechanisms for me, because I don't like the combat here at all. But I don't think it's unique to Maracaibo. I mean, first of all, you're flipping a tile over and you're kind of just choosing whichever action is going to give you the most, the most benefits from that combat. I don't know. I didn't think it was that fun. But what I really don't like about it is that shared kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to get influence in this one and move this cube off. And if somebody else moves up there, then I might get more points, but they're also getting influence. I don't like that shared incentive. Adam talks about that a lot, and I think he likes it in games. Maybe he can tell me how he feels about this combat, but I don't like it very much. And I also didn't find the action of doing the combat very interesting. And it is very confusing, at least as a concept, until you wrap your head around it. So not my favorite part. What was my favorite part, though, was the tableau building. There is a lot of fun synergies between, in fact, they even use the term synergy tokens, or these things you can collect to make your cards better. But there's a lot of fun synergies between the cards that you build and then how the rest of your game can play out. And that was kind of what dictated my direction in the game and gave me some fun. Like, oh, I've got these 3 cards in my tableau. I better go and do that thing because it's going to trigger this other card that I've got that's going to get me extra endgame income, or endgame points or income or something like that. So I like tableau builders. I think Maracaibo has a couple interesting choices in there aside from just building up the tableau, but they're multi-use cards. So you could give up those cards to spend them for some other action. So I think that part is my favorite part of Maracaibo, but it's definitely not the combat.
Yeah, to touch on that combat, Tim, I thought it was interesting. I don't know if it was enjoyable. The whole thing where you're moving up this influence track and you're gaining some tiny amounts of points here, and you get a little point multiplier if you make it up this far on the track. Everything here it felt excruciating trying to whittle out a few points here and there. Nothing felt super fun or explosive. You're going to get points for this. You're going to get points for that. oh, maybe I edged out a couple 1/2 to 3 points on this turn, so that at the end of the game I'll be in a I'll lose by 5 points instead of 8 points is what it turned out to be in this game for me. But yeah, and in general, just to back it up a little bit, this game had just had a lot going on. We start with this rondel, but that branches out into this exploration track down here, and then this combat influence track up here. And there's this whole hand management piece where you can have 4 cards or 6 cards, and then you can put 3 cards over here in your planning area. So just a lot of funky little mechanisms that we haven't even touched on yet. So just in general, there was just, it seemed a little bit unfocused overall, the game did for me.
Yeah, I'll second that. And that seems to be a bit of a trademark of Alexander Pfister games. I mean, I felt the same way in Great Western Trail. I like this much better than I like Great Western Trail. In that one, still some of the things like the buildings are incomprehensible to me. I mean, I've unlearned it and learned it and unlearned it again multiple times, and I had never quite gotten my head around it. I feel like this one was a little bit more straightforward, but I do feel like it had a ton of different things that you could be thinking about, and it's very sandboxy. You've got to try to figure out, do I want to focus on combat and influence? Do I want to focus on the exploration track? Do I want to focus on getting a lot of points from cards? Some combination of the bunch? So there's really nothing in this game that is going to automatically drive you toward one strategy or another, except possibly the profession cards. We didn't mention that, but at the beginning of the game, you choose one of 2 profession cards, and those tend to drive you toward a particular strategy. So like I, for example, had one that was called the Fighting Spirit or something like that. And it rewarded me for doing things like getting combat tokens and fulfilling quests. There were other ones, like I think, Tim, you had one that kind of rewarded you for doing exploration if you were inclined to do that. So other than that, you could kind of go off and just do whatever you want to do.
I don't think we've said anything that's too positive here, but the reality is I still had fun with the gameplay mechanisms. I still thought that there were interesting choices and stuff to make here. So it's not all negative. But that said, are you guys ready to get into the art and production? All right, then let's get into the negative, the real negative of the game.
Oh, man.
Now, Maracaibo has a bright, colorful board. It's nice, right? I mean, it's set in the Caribbean. The Caribbean's beautiful. And that's about the best part of the production I can say here. The player boards are one of the most unusable things I've ever seen in a game. It is a bunch of random icons spread all over the place with discs you're taking off. And by the way, if I remember, I think these are dual layer boards, but only the bottom disc sets in. And so then I think it might be. I can't remember now. Either way, I know that in person, these boards are pretty messy to have these discs laying all over the place. But the way that they're laid out and the way that the rewards are laid out and everything, it just doesn't make any sense to me. Well, I'll just stop there because when it comes back around to me, I got to jump into something else too. But I'm not a fan of the user experience in this game. It's a beer to get into and understand.
I totally agree, Tim. Like you said, the map of the Caribbean is nice, and then it's littered with these little arrows pointing here and pointing there in different sized circles, which are weird. The exploration track dotted with all these icons that are just smothering the beautiful tropical forest at the bottom of the map. And you've got the old school looking influence track at the top. So aside from what could be some beautiful Caribbean map work, there's not much to it. It leaves a sour taste in my mouth.
So the art in Maracaibo, I've seen worse. That's what I got to say about it. I mean, it was not terrible. What is pretty terrible is the number of tiny little components that you have on this one. And I think I want to keep coming back to a comment that Adam made a couple episodes ago about the old sneeze and scatter. And I feel like this is one where, especially if you can only lock in the 2-layer player boards, the bottom token, then you're going to be sneezing and scattering all over the place. So that was a little bit unfortunate. The thing that really bugged me, though, was the iconography in this game. By the end of 3 or 4 games, whatever it is that I've played now, I feel like I'm finally starting to comprehend a little bit. But oh my goodness, there is so much iconography, and it goes on. There are literally sentences of iconography in this thing with 10 steps. And for the first several times I played it, I hadn't the slightest clue what any of this meant, which again may have something to do with the fact that I didn't read the instruction book, which maybe I should have. But holy cow, even knowing what those things meant, it was difficult tracking them. Now on BGA, you have the tooltips, the little hover the mouse over and it'll explain it to you. That's great. But I think this is one where it actually helps to play this game for the first couple times on BGA so that you have access to that and can understand the actual iconography a little bit better.
I haven't seen a lot of worse artwork. The anatomy and all the people in these cards is just not, it doesn't actually work. Listen, we were talking at the start, when we started the game night, we happened to be talking about Dennis Lohausen's art, and someone made an offhand comment about him being the discount Clemens Franz. But I think that the artist on this game was a discount Dennis Lohausen. So not a fan of the artwork here. Not really a fan of the user experience. Not a fan of the iconography. Yeah, really not a fan of the production on Maracaibo.
It's got that white bordered cards that you dig though, Tim. So I don't know. I haven't mentioned those yet.
That's probably the whole problem. And and by the way, I'm looking at the player board, Chris. This is not dual layer player board at all. No. So neither of the discs sit on top. They're just 24 discs sitting stacked, little tiny brown discs sitting stacked all over this player board. But it's just like the player board, it's not even just about the stackability of it. It's just the weirdness of the layout of there's no organization. There are these random benefits all over the place with different colors and iconography and some pre-printed benefits on the board. And man, none of this makes sense to me.
It's icon salad.
All right, well, let's jump into our final question. And that is, would you request to play the game again?
I want to say, I don't think I would, but I kind of, some part of me wants to go back to this and try it again. I have no idea why. After all the stuff we just said. Which is funny. My thoughts are this is one of those games. I was watching the video. It's got all of this stuff going on, this like I said, all these tracks and all these cards. And you even have these little helpers we didn't even mention. You can put those out on little spots that give you benefits. This is one of those games. It's so unfocused. It's kind of like, learn the tricky combination, figure out the tricky combination that'll help you win the game, or those tricky combinations are in there, and it's just a matter of time before you piece them together. So there is some thrill in making that work, but I can't justify it. I can't go back to this one. If that is your thing, having this smorgasbord of stuff, and I think there are a number of strategies that you could chain things together and find, I do want to focus on the exploration track and go way down there. Or I'm going to focus on this combat, work my way up all these tracks and be a sellsword. There are these different ways you could go, but for me, it's a little excessive. I want something a little more focused. I want something with a little more player interaction. If it's going to be a 3.91 complexity, it almost seems like complexity and systems and mechanisms for system's sake. So for me, that's not a game that I enjoy. So I almost want to go back to this one, but if it's a no, I'm not going to request to play this one again. Maybe I would do it in a few months here on Board Game Arena just to see if there's anything there. But right now, I don't want to look at this one again.
Well, first of all, you guys speak for yourselves. I actually did say some nice stuff about the game as we were talking about it. So, and the answer is yes, I would ask to play this one again, even with all the kind of mediocre talk and the production that none of us like the production. I think that's fair to say that I still do want to play this game again. Now, I'm going to caveat that with, I want to play it on BGA, and I will continue to play it on BGA. I don't think this is one that I want to deal with the bear of a setup and manipulating all the various little tokens and pieces. I don't think that that's one that I am going to be jonesing to play in real life. But on BGA, where the game is taking care of all the various details for you, I think that's great. Didn't mention it earlier, but this is also one where I think it's going to suffer from the same issue that Arc Nova does, which is you got to remember all these different things. Like, every time I do this, I need to get the points from this and points from that, and that gives me combat and all that. I think that's going to be the same thing with Maracaibo. So if a computer's taking care of that for me, great. Otherwise, not as much. But I actually did have fun playing this game. I had enough fun playing this game that even after getting blown away from not reading the instruction book a couple times, I still wanted to come back and play it. So I have some pretty warm feelings about this one.
Yeah, this is an interesting one because when we did I think it was our 2021 end of year episode, this was my biggest disappointment for the year. I had really high expectations, really excited about it. I bought it. Actually, it was gifted to me. It was given as a gift. and I busted. I learned it. It was a pretty big, it was a lot of work to learn this game and get through a first couple of games. And I set it up, and this was in 2021, right? There wasn't a lot of people. You weren't hanging around with a lot of people at the time. This is like early COVID time. So I played it solo, and I played it solo like 6 or 7 times. And I was determined to try to get through. There's like a campaign that comes in the box with this. I want to speak a little bit about that too. But basically, after 7 plays, I just decided I wasn't having enough fun solo. But I always thought maybe this is a game that would be pretty fun in person. But I ended up selling it. It wasn't going to get played for me. So I didn't have super high expectations for it. But when Chris said he really wanted to try it, I was like, yeah, I'll revisit this and I'll finally get to play it in person again. And my feelings are a lot like Adam's. It's like, there's almost nothing that tells me I should play this game again. There's nothing about the game itself when I think about it that I'm excited about. But several times through the game, I said, dang it, Chris, I actually like this game. I like taking my turn. I'm having fun taking my turn, even if it's not kind of like the types of mechanisms I want to play. So I don't think I'm going to request it, but I would like to. I would be happy to play. Let me say that. I would be happy to play it some more. And I think especially with it on Board Game Arena, I think it's going to be fun to explore a little bit more. I think if, Chris invites me to a game, I'm going to be in there having a fun time. There was a lot of downtime here. And I don't know if it was just on a first play, but that definitely was like a big turnoff. And maybe that would serve it better as an async game on Board Game Arena where I don't have to worry about how long somebody's taking on their turn. But I'm serious. I would like sat on my turn. I usually could care less how long people are taking on their turns. We're all talking and stuff like that. But I'm telling you, it was like 10, 15 minutes before it got back around to my turn. Yeah. I mean, we literally only had like 12 or 15 turns in the whole game. And the game took 3 hours. And it was so long. I was waiting 4 minutes, 5 minutes for one person to finish up their turn here. So that's really hard to sit through when there's not a lot of interaction going on the board. I could care less what you guys were doing most of the game. So why sit here for 4 minutes and wait for it?
Yeah.
So I think it's a nice middling mix of like some kind of cool discovery going on here, but maybe just too bloated, too much overhead for it to be really exciting. But yeah, it's a very interesting game for sure. Now, I did want to mention that campaign that comes in the box. I think it's one of the coolest implementations of a campaign in a game. It's really neat how it does it. There's these quests. If you play a standalone game like we did tonight, there are these quests that go out around the board, and you just put these little tiles out, and if you move to that space, you spend something and you get benefits. But in the campaign game, there are different types of quests that go around the board that might trigger like a story event. And then you flip over a card and you read a little story. Then it might introduce a new character that ends up turning into a card you can buy. It might change a location on the map by putting a little tile overlay on a space on the map that changes what it does or how it works. And that was really cool. And I think if you do like this game, that would be a blast to explore with a group that are kind of going through that campaign game that doesn't drastically change the rules or anything like that, but just shifts it up and gives a variety. So, that's very cool. Probably one of the best pseudo legacy versions of a game I've ever seen, especially in a Euro game. So kudos to Alexander Pfister for putting that in the box. But yeah, otherwise just a very interesting, little bit quirky game that is, kind of fun, kind of annoying to me.
So we talked about the downtime between turns, and at 4 players on Board Game Arena, it takes about 3 hours. Ideal player count. I know some of our listeners care about that. What do you guys think here? I don't think it's 2 because of the influence track. I don't think it's 4 because of the downtime.
No.
Probably 3. I think it's still going to take a long time, but 3 would be my guess for Maracaibo.
Well, I don't know. That's a little crazy because 3 is a pretty rough player count, except that it's always the right answer.
Right.
3 is always the right answer, and it is the right answer here as well.
Yeah, maybe. To be honest, even with the downtime, though, I think that there's not a lot of interaction, but I think the one thing that does make the game that adds some interest to the decisions, and I think why I didn't like it solo was because when you're playing with just one person, and then I think it was just a single automa when you play solo, but there's just not as much interruptions in the choices you're making and stuff like that. And like you said, the influence track. I almost think that 4 is the right player count for this. If you're going to play this async, I think 4 is the right player count for it. If you're going to play it in person, yeah, that's the problem. That's always the problem with a Euro at 4 players is that there's too much downtime. But I think the most fun you're going to have interacting with the board is probably going to be when there's more people getting in your way and stopping what you're doing. I don't remember how it changes with player count, though. I think there may be some spaces that are taken off in a 3-player game and stuff like that. So maybe it feels similar in a 3-player as it does in a 4.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, even with more players, there's not that many places where someone can actually put a stop to what you're doing. they can maybe use up one of the market spaces before you do, which is not insignificant.
Right.
Or they can speed to the end and, force the end of the round. But other than that, there's still not a lot of interaction there.
Yeah, that's true. But the influence matters, and even those market spaces did dictate a couple times what spaces I was going to take, because I was like, oh, there's no market spaces left. It's it's a inefficient turn for me to go to that space then. So I don't know. Yeah, it's a good call, but you're probably right. Probably 3 is a good space. All right. Well, I think that will wrap up the conversation on Maracaibo tonight. Let's chat about a couple of games that have been on our table right after this. All right, welcome back. What have you guys been playing this week?
Well, Tim, you were here, I don't know, a month ago, 3 weeks ago. I can't remember how long ago it was. But you had bought me, I believe you bought me Starship Captains.
That's right.
For my
Your birthday. Last summer, maybe.
Yeah, last time, the time you were here before that. So you mostly learned the rules. I remember watching a video on this one, but it was confusing. It seemed like a lot going on for what was supposed to be a relatively light game. But you learned the rules, and I trudged through it, a little bit of memory too. But we got this one going, and you know what? I had a lot of fun playing this one. There's a little central map with these different planets and different away missions at all these different planets, and some blank planets with little numbers on them, 1 through 7. As you do an away mission, that next planet flips up a next mission, so you know where the next missions are going to be available, but there's always a series of blank planets, so you can't just go anywhere. So there's a little bit of consequence to how you're moving around the map, and you know a little bit about what's coming up next and where there's going to be new missions, so that's kind of cool. And then you have your player board, which I thought was cool. That's actually this little Enterprise looking ship. This is largely a theme of Star Trek-ish sort of game. It's very Star Trek-ish. You have the different types of workers. You have your blue, your yellow, and your red, and they're on the bridge of your little miniature Enterprise. So you're putting them out, doing these actions. Maybe that gives you a mission, and then you're using some more of your little crew members to fulfill the requirements of the action, and you get the benefits for it. You can also use your crew members to go to these designated spots, and that can give you a tech or let you move around the board. If you get a tech, if you're putting that in your tech, that gives you some upgraded actions for the different color players. You can get these little androids. Those are kind of a wild and let you do anything. And then I also liked, this is a quick and dirty overview, I also liked the damage management of this game. You can incur damage either on your ship itself in the little cargo bays, or on the little tech panel where you have these increased actions, these bonus actions. And if you have damage there, you can't put a card there. So you want to clear that out so you can put these cards there. As you're putting these tech cards down or these improved actions, they have these icons on the left and right. If you match those up, you get the little bonus there too. So a lot of fun things going on in this game, Starship Captains. I had heard a few bad reviews on this one, so I had a low expectation going in, but we played it and I had an absolute blast, Tim, playing this one with you. We just played it at 2 turns. We're quick and snappy. We were doing fun stuff the whole time, and in the end, we had a close battle. I thought we played well. It was relatively light, but fun and thinky, important turns. Lots of depth going on. You had to plan ahead what you're going to do to make sure you're doing something pretty smart. So a lot of fun things going on here in Starship Captains. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just a fun, bright theme for kind of a Euro-ish game. It's got this Star Trek theme on it, but it's cartoony. It's almost like Lower Decks show, I think. It kind of feels more like that.
Exactly.
And so it's just fun to interact with and play. But yeah, absolutely, it surprised me. For a kind of a midweight Euro, it had a lot of fun combos. It probably felt more like Lost Ruins of Arnak than anything else I'd played in a long time. You would take a turn, pretty simple turn, but then sometimes you'd manage to get a trigger that, kind of trigger a little bonus that let you expand that turn and make it better. My favorite parts that I recall is, like Adam said, it's been a few weeks since we played, but you could buy all these upgrade cards, and there was such a huge variety. It could either give you new action spaces or just ongoing benefits to some of the actions you're taking. But whenever you put one of these upgrades into your ship, there's like little icons on the sides of the cards. And if you match up icons between the tech and the one next to it, then you get another little bonus. So fun little puzzle there, kind of like Wayfarers of the South Tigris, if you guys remember that, had that in the Tableau building on one of the sections. And then there was this clever thing where you could spend these badges that you collect, and then you can upgrade your crewmates, because you have like 3 different color crew members and then a generic one, like an ensign, a gray guy, and you can upgrade them. You can either swap one for a different color if you really need a different color that round, or you can put this little ring on it to make it like a captain or whatever, a
super cool guy,
whatever you call a officer. It's like you make it an officer, and then they can get 2 actions in a turn, or they can take an action then direct somebody to do a different action. You're completing these quests that are fun, little decent interaction on the map where you're kind of racing to the best quests out there. I had a fun time playing this. The one thing that I remember towards the end of it, and that'll be interesting after a couple plays if this stuck through. I remember towards the end, it started to feel like, okay, I've already built out all the techs I can. I've kind of built up the engine I can, and now the actions are starting to get a little like repetitive. Like that's the only criticism that I had on my first play, is that the first 3 rounds out of 4, I was like, wow, this game is so fun. It's such fun decisions. It feels tense. It feels like I've got to beat Adam to this thing. I've got to get this thing done before pirates attack again and there's more damage to my ship. And then I remember that last round being like, okay, it's probably going on a few turns too long. So that's something I don't know after a first play if that's a real problem or not. But generally, I really like Starship Captains, and I'd really like to explore it again. When I rated the games that I had marked that I played, and I put an 8 on it. I think it's a solid 8 game for me. It was fun all around. And yeah, like you said, it's not a heavy game, but there's enough stuff that the teach was a little longer than I expected, but it paid off in that there was pretty interesting choices and decisions throughout it.
I love the way this game looks. I mean, I'm just looking at it on BGG right now, and I really like how colorful it is. The art is actually really neat. I mean, it's very cartoony, but fun cartoony, good cartoony, not crappy, my little kid could draw it cartoony. And the spaceships, I mean, that is a really neat little effect there they have with the little Starship Enterprise looking things. The only thing I got to wonder is, how is this not copyright infringement?
It's parody.
If this is not a licensed Star Trek property here.
I think it's considered parody. I think you can do parody and
get away with it.
Yeah, I think it's fine. The one thing I remember, so the starships are cool because there's like this track that when you use one of your workers, you put it in this track and it slides to the end of the row. But the weird thing about it, Adam called this out while you were playing it, is that you basically just get all the workers back at the beginning of the round. So there was only 1 or 2 actions over the entire course of the game where it just said, like, use the worker at the front. So it almost never mattered. Even though it's a clever idea, it almost didn't make any difference at all.
Yeah. So what you're talking about, Tim, is this queuing. They're kind of queued up in a line. So they kind of go in order. And that, like you're saying, that didn't really matter except in maybe 1 or 2 cases. That'd be neat to see that kind of used a little more. I wanted to mention the designer, Peter B. Hofgaard, a slew of artists. The art is great. A lot of the theme comes out, like you were alluding to, Chris, in these missions, these away missions, or have these silly names, and the picture illustrates it perfectly. Some little wacky stuff going on. And this is by Czech Games Edition. And this came out in 2022. Great at 2 players, probably great at 3. I don't know how it would work at 4. Probably too much downtime.
All right, so on my table, I have a fun little game that I picked up while I was on a recent trip to Iceland, which was great fun. And it's the reason why I wasn't on our last episode, because I was out of the country. And I was looking the whole time for a board game to buy, and hopefully something that was actually relevant to my time in Iceland. And, you could argue that something like Blood Rage or, anything Viking themed is kind of relevant. But, that wasn't what I was going for. I wanted something that was a little bit more relevant to location. And just as an aside, I don't know if we have any Icelandic listeners out there, but I'm dying to hear what the game culture is like in Iceland, because it seems like a place where it would be perfect for gamers, because you have rural areas, and where one of the best things you could possibly do is get together with your friends and play board games when you don't have all those city things to keep you occupied. Anyway, I think it seems like it would be a great game culture, but I wasn't there long enough to be able to really dig into it. So I'd be curious to know. Now, as to the game, I was at the Icelandic National Museum on our last day heading out, and I thought I'd failed in my quest, but in the gift shop, they had a fun little game called Sagnir, which is designed by Svavar Björgvinsson and Monica Brskova and published by Gamia Games. This is not hardcore strategy game. This is a pretty light little fun thing, and it's intended to be, I think, a reflection on Icelandic culture. So they actually have on the tiles pictures of places that I had been on my trip, when that was also very cool, and it was exactly what I was looking for. But the idea behind this game is you lay out a grid of tiles which come in one of the 4 basic elements, earth, wind, fire, and water, and the northern lights as a wild. And you have a handful of tiles with those same different types of terrain on them. And you also have cards that are these mythical beasts that come from Icelandic or Norse mythology. And so your goal in the game is to try to create spaces on the board where those mythical creatures can come back. And each mythical creature has a desired habitat. And that's reflected by not just the type of habitat, but a certain pattern that habitats have to be placed in. So there's it'll show a little grid on the card. And an earth giant, for example, may require you to have a square of 4 earth tiles, something like that. And so you're taking your turns, and each round you have the ability to flip over tiles and replace them with ones that are in your hand. You can play monster cards. There are some shared scoring cards that you can use. And you also have a token that you move around the board so that you can play these various other cards. So, for example, if you want to play one of your monster cards, you have to be on one of the tiles that matches their habitat that they need. So we played a game of this, my family and I, when we got home. We played it yesterday as a fun little Easter treat. It took us about 20 minutes, and it was just some light, puzzly little fun, which brought back some really nice memories of our trip. For example, it has Skagafoss, which is a very famous waterfall in Iceland, on the water card. Things like that just made it really delightful. Happy to play this one again. And I was actually surprised my wife really enjoyed this one. She's usually pretty particular about games, and it's not every game that she loves. In this one, she really enjoyed. So I imagine we'll actually get a chance to play this one again.
Chris, is that a game that you think, is that in the United, like, could you find it in the United States, or do you feel like this is probably just very regional?
That's a good question. It's on BGG, and it's got just a couple of ratings, so it doesn't seem like it's incredibly well distributed. And it's part of what they call, for Gemia Games, I think it's Norse Heritage Collection. There was a few games they had at this same gift shop that had different themes related to Norse mythology and Norse culture and history. So my guess is it's probably got a pretty small distribution. But whether or not you could actually get it in the United States without ordering it from overseas, I'm not really sure.
Well, when in Rome, I guess if you're in Iceland, you got to play an Icelandic game. So that's awesome. You found something fun. All right. Well, on my table, I've been playing a very thematic midweight Euro called Djinn. That's Djinn, like the genie. This was designed by Benjamin Schwer and published by Hull Games. And the art was done by the discount Clement Franz, Dennis Lauhausen. But I digress. This is a pretty interesting Euro where the idea is that you're walking around this ancient Middle Eastern, maybe Arabian town, and trying to capture jinns, these genies that are causing mischief around the city. The way this board is laid out is that there's kind of a oval in the middle of the board that represents the city. And this not only creates the area that you're collecting these genies or capturing them, but also it represents the action selection mechanism. And in an interesting tie into Maracaibo, it's kind of a rondel type of mechanism, but it's almost like a maze. It's like you have 2 of each of these different action types randomly distributed around this board. And what you do is on your turn, you move 1 space. And when you move a space, you take the action. But your character, when you end there, you have to be facing the direction that you moved into that space, because there's always 2 routes out of that space you moved into. So you can never go back the direction you came from on the next turn. You always have 2 different paths you can go to from there. An interesting thing is if you move into a space behind somebody else that just took that action, you have to pay them a coin, or you can jump over them as well. So there's a little bit of player interaction with, like, did somebody get to a space, run right in front of you and kind of block you out or make it more expensive for you. The actions are represented. There's 6 icons, and there are 6 regions on that board outside of that oval that kind of represent each of these actions. But the bottom line is you're kind of collecting these resources. You're collecting bottles and corks, and then you're going to spaces that are actually where these actions are. You might go to a space that has genies on it or jinns on it. And if you have the right bottle and cork, you spend energy, which is tracked on your player board, and then you can capture the genie. Those are worth end game points. And if you get 3 of the same color genie, then you can actually turn that in for a bonus, a one-time bonus in the game. So, it's kind of a little bit of a set collection, but the action selection mechanism is really cool. It's very thematic. It felt like you were going around some of the actions you can take are like collecting apprentices that help capturing the genies better. You can take, there's this market action that lets you exchange different resources you need to get the bottles you need or the corks you need. All the decisions were pretty fun. All the actions you're taking were pretty fun. There's a very cool player board here that's almost like a little puzzle pieces where everything that you collect in the game to kind of upgrade your actions and stuff like that kind of slot into your player board and build out the board. Oh, but let me tell you about the most fun and probably the most unique mechanism here. At the start of the game, you do a draft where everybody has an asymmetric unique player power, but also an asymmetric negative power, like something that's bad for you. And so you have to do a snake draft at the beginning where you have to draft one good power and one bad power. So every game, like you might end up with an action that's going to be significantly worse for you than every other player because of the bad power, but you also might end up with an ongoing power or some like start of game benefit that's better for you than everybody else. That was pretty fun. I think that could really make the game change up a little bit. All said, I had a really fun time playing this. Felt very Euro-y, but it did have a cool theme on it. It did feel like, yeah, you were out catching Djinns, but yeah, you could have been busting ghosts too. It felt like you were moving around, getting the traps and the proton packs and shooting ghosts and stuff. But yeah, pretty clever. I liked it. Artwork was just okay. Felt very Euro-y, but the other production pieces, all the Djinns had screen printed meeples and they had these big wooden keys that used for like a bonus resource. And the player boards were really cool. Probably one of the better player boards. I think I would have had to call this out when we did our player board episode if I'd played it before. But I really liked it. I'd like to go back and play this game again. I'm a little afraid that after a few plays, it'd start to feel a little samey. The actions you're doing kind of collecting the same types of resources and then going and doing the same actions. But generally, I had a fun time playing it. Each of the three players that we were, the group that we played with all kind of took different routes to the actions they were taking. So maybe it would drive you in different directions on another play. Anyway, I liked Djinn a decent amount. What do you guys think? Have you had your eyes on this one?
I've heard about this one just a little bit. I'm looking at it now. I like the look of this game. Tim has a very neat aesthetic. I think that oval is kind of unique with the different chunks around the outside. But I don't know, hearing, Euro-y doing this, the little actions here, get some resources, trade them into this. It sounds like every other Euro game out there. Is there any kind of special hook to grab me? Why would I play this instead of Starship Captains or Gaia Project or Age of Innovation?
Well, the Dennis Lohausen art.
Oh, well, that's true.
There wasn't really anything really unique other than it was just solid. I mean, it's fun engine building, fun action selection. So let me just say that those are two things that I love in good Euro games. And this had two of those mechanisms that were both great. But like I said, I'm afraid it gets samey because you really were just like, okay, I got to go here to trade for bottles, and then I got to go here to get corks, and then I got to go here to capture the Djinn and spend energy, and then I got to go here to refresh my energy. So the problem was it was like an order fulfillment thing where the order was always the same. And there were fun things that were happening there, and there were probably the engine building was the most fun part of it, but I wouldn't say it was super standout. It wasn't super unique in any other way, but it was thematic and it was fun engine building. So there's that.
Okay.
I like the idea of the thematic Euro. I mean, I think that's something that's pretty appealing. And, art jokes notwithstanding, I actually think this game looks really neat. I like the appearance of it.
Yeah, it does. It's got a cool presentation. The art, while it's kind of spread out across the board and everything like that, it's not a bad example of Dennis Lohausen's work, to be honest. Yeah. It's a pretty nice looking game overall, but it does look standard Euro fare for being a unique theme. It looks like a kind of an old school Euro a little bit. But yeah, that was Djinn. Decent game I'd like to revisit and see if it sticks with me a little bit. All right. Well, I think that will wrap up this episode. If you enjoy the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/boardgameHotTakes. And you can follow us on Blue Sky and on our Facebook group. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.